intention to conduct this meeting with the courtesy and decorum that's expected of us as representatives. We ask you to please help us attain that goal. This morning we will start with Representative White and his House Bill 285. Representative, go ahead when you're ready. Better have a roll call first.
Chairman Land,
Here.
Vice Chair Dorman,
Here.
Representative Weber,
Here.
Representative Bratton, Burns,
Here.
Breaker,
Here.
Gossen, Hurst,
Here.
Kelly, Lynch,
Here.
Smith, Walker.
Present. We have a quorum. Representative White.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee, for hearing the bill today. I'm Representative Bill White. I represent the 161st District in Joplin. This bill came about as a result of our 2011 tornado in Joplin. Everybody's pretty aware of it. A lot of the people in this room behind me and in front of me were down helping us in Joplin after the fact. We ran into a scenario where we lost a lot of housing, about 4,000 low-income housing units. Now, these weren't all MHTC housing units by any means. These were the old type of low-income housing you have in a town the age of Joplin. Some of them were small miners' houses, some of them were small apartments dating from just after the turn of the century. With our MHTC low-income housing tax credits, we got back 355. That is not enough. We still have a low-income housing problem. The problem is that 355 low-income housing units could have been and would have been more. When we had our bidding going on for the MHTC housing, well, first of all, I'll say it required prevailing wage. We'll talk about it in a second. But the MHTC had specified the wrong prevailing wage criteria, and so they extended the bidding a month, and for everybody to go back and use the new wages. Well, I can tell you what happened when those wages went up for the prevailing wage. The number of units went down on the new bids, the number of quality went down on the bids, and the preferred type of housing went down. It became less preferred in my own opinion. What I want in my community are single-family housing units. Then I go down the list: duplex, quadplex, apartments if you've got to down at the end. You have to build a much better sense of community with single-family housing. These things, with this increase in prevailing wage, let alone the requirement of prevailing wage, all three items went down in a negative direction in my opinion. Okay, why is prevailing wage there to begin with? First of all, MHTC housing has not required, until 2010, prevailing wage. Actually, we started doing low-income housing tax credits in 1990. Was never applied until 2010 during the Nixon administration when Treasurer Ziefel was the chairman, and it was added in 2010. 2011, we have across the state, Joplin being the largest of the disasters. We had many disasters. It highlighted the problem that all of a sudden you have low-income housing requiring prevailing wage. Why is it a problem? Well, low-income housing tax credits don't qualify for anything about prevailing wage. First of all, the Supreme Court of the United States and the Missouri Supreme Court have both held that tax credits are not considered a government expenditure. You all on this panel, and I'm sure most people behind me, if not all of them, understand how tax credits work. Money never comes into the government. This is credits that we are giving legislatively before money ever comes in. So both Supreme Courts have said this is not a government expenditure when considering things that require government expenditures. Both Missouri and the U.S. Supreme Court. Second, it doesn't meet the definition of what a public works project is. This is not a public thing. These are private individuals, private companies building housing with tax credits for private individuals. Nothing about this is a public work. You look at the definitions of public work, it does not fit anywhere in the picture. So the reason, in my opinion, this was done was to make some people happy, some supporters happy. And had we not had a statewide series of disasters, and primarily Joplin, we had St. Louis, we had flooding on both the rivers, had a tornado in Sedalia. Had the disaster year not occurred right after this, it probably would have gone on, people wouldn't have even noticed hardly that you had prevailing wage. Now, in a lot of places, in larger cities, I would have ventured to guess that a vast majority of the low-income housing bids that are put in, probably, if they're union wage, they're going to be a prevailing wage. Might even be a little higher than prevailing wage. So it may not have been as, if the issue, may not have come to the forefront had we been predominantly in the two cities where the great majority of these housing occurs. So I wrote many letters for companies, and I can tell the people, this is not the idea of we get into what prevailing wage is and isn't. The idea is to protect local workers. A lot of the bids, we have off this topic, but we built our high school down, we did a lot of rebuilding in Joplin. A whole lot of those people are not local companies and they're not local workers. They're brought in from out of state because they got the bids for low-income housing for schools, et cetera. Same with these low-income housings. I wrote the letters for these people after they answered questions when I had a whole page of them. That's why I can say, I just know, well, numbers were there because you can see the numbers change when they had to resubmit their bids. Quality is because I asked questions. They have a sheet of pages. Most of you know I'm kind of a green Republican. We had bids that initially were insulated concrete form housing, that is tornado-proof pretty much housing. We had housing with good insulation, above standard. We had lots of good quality housing, high U factors in windows, et cetera, et cetera. When those bids came back in to try to recoup that additional cost that was going out for labor, those things went down. You know, window ratings got worse, they became cheap windows, and low-income housing that is not energy efficient isn't really very low-income housing because those people have to pay the utility bills. And why is this important? Again, we talk about the quality, but the housing that was left. My daughter had rented, well, I would guess it was probably made in the 1920s, maybe. It was a building with 6, 7 apartments in it, 2, 3 story. She rented it before the tornado. A couple of years, it was like $250. That building was not destroyed in the tornado. It was not a place I would have wanted to have lived, but it now rents for over $400 a month. When you have scarcity in any commodity, including housing, it goes up. Our Attorney General did a good job of looking for people doing immediate price gouging, but it doesn't take very long to up rents and not have it be considered a price gouge. So we still today, the problem we have most of my town is we do not have enough low-income housing. This exacerbated requiring prevailing wage on low-income housing in disaster zones. This bill is exactly that. Only in governor-declared disaster zones does this ban the use of prevailing wage. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Representative Weber? Go ahead.
We've seen this bill before, so
It's true. Got off the floor last year, yeah. Didn't go anywhere in the Senate.
and hopefully it's about the same path this year.
We hope not.
First off, just in general, this will apply to sort of all the, since you're going first, all the prevailing wage bills. I think it'll make all of our dialogue a lot simpler if we all agree on certain things. And one of the first things that I want to make sure we agree on is that this really is about wages and about, and you agree that.
No, I'm not agreeing. It's about, this is about low-income housing, and it's affected by
Right, but you talked about
capricious wage set.
prevailing wage is about wages, and so with the prevailing wage law, workers get paid more for the work they do, and without a prevailing wage law, they get paid less for the work they do. We can debate the value of that, but we agree with that general principle, don't we?
If it's a public works project, it requires prevailing wage, yeah.
Right, which is higher, which means that workers make more money
Then,
than without a prevailing wage law.
in most cases, yes.
Okay.
I would say not across the board, no. There are, yes, indeed, there are
Okay.
contractors. Union contractors may pay their people more than prevailing wage. In a particular, if their time and grade, how their union pay scales work, they may actually pay more on a
Right.
prevailing wage job than is required.
As a
A private contractor that has really good, stone masons, we have some pretty good construction companies down there that pay their people well.
But as a general rule, you agree that for this, and I don't want to jump ahead, there's a bill about schools, and it talks about cost savings. The cost savings that they're talking about in that bill, the cost savings that you're talking about, which would, you say would lead to more housing units, those cost savings come from reducing the payments to workers.
I would say that in this bill, they come by applying an appropriate wage scale to them, yes.
Which
Because
which reduces their pay.
if we were to, well, it does not reduce their pay if they wouldn't get it. This doesn't qualify as prevailing wage. If this bill's about schools, if this bill's about building a highway, those are prevailing wage under the statute right now.
Right.
But those require prevailing wage, so I would agree, if you don't have prevailing wage on building a road project, you may, I will say may, because again, it depends on your contractor, have lower wages paid.
But the only way that you solve the quote problem that you're asserting here is, which is that they can't build as many housing units, is,
Right.
The only way you fix that is by
I will totally
reducing
say the
people's
pay
wage.
scale,
Right.
requiring prevailing
Reducing
wage
wage.
on this project caused us to have less housing built, yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
well, I want to be clear, we're talking about the same thing. The other issue that so that you and I have a fundamental disagreement on prevailing wage, and we'll set that
Well, I'm not
aside.
sure we really do.
No, we do.
This bill is different than your other bills you're hearing.
Well, so let's talk about that. The other component, and I understand that what happened in Joplin was absolutely horrible, and I know that affected you personally and in a lot of different ways. I mean, it was just bad all around. But you have to agree that this bill doesn't just apply to Joplin.
This bill applies to disaster.
Right.
Government declared disaster areas.
What are most of those areas? Why are most of those areas declared disasters?
Natural disasters. They
What
come
kind
in
of,
all shapes and sizes.
but the
Wind-
majority of counties.
Wind, water, lightning, ice, floods.
You haven't hit the main,
Earthquakes.
you haven't hit the main one yet. What's the main one? There's one that overwhelmingly dominates Missouri. Droughts. Droughts.
If they're declared disaster. area.
Right, and then most counties in the state of Missouri, which are declared disasters, are because of droughts. But droughts don't affect the structural integrity of buildings, do they?
Drought can affect the need for low-income housing, absolutely.
Okay, but not.
This is
not-
about low-income housing. This is, in drought, if you don't have a job, you have an increased demand for low-income housing.
More often than not, the criteria for your bill, while Joplin may be the face of it, more often than not, it will be applying to areas that are a disaster area because of
Okay.
a drought than because of a tornado.
This is MHDC low-income housing tax credits.
Right.
If there's not a demand for low-income housing in a drought area, then they're not going to be getting requests in for low-income housing to be built in disaster. You know, you've got to make, this is a private, these are private.
No, they build them everywhere.
They
right?
build them
It's not
everywhere.
just after tornadoes.
But
They're building them
we
in
built
Columbia
the
right
whole-
now.
In disaster areas, in floods, in probably earthquakes, in tornadoes, they need more low-income housing because it's been destroyed. In a drought, you may need more low-income housing because there may be a whole lot more low-income people.
Let me-
Not that the housing went away, but now there is low-income housing people there.
Let me ask one more quick question and then I'll be quiet. Okay, so we've got, let's say Boone County, say my county. We've got a low-income housing unit that's being built, MHDC tax credits are being involved in it. It is a year-long project. 6 months into the project, we were declared a disaster area because of a drought. It's got nothing to do with anything other than lack of rain. Do we switch and all of a sudden prevailing wage doesn't have to be paid anymore?
Contract's already been awarded. Now, okay, you're
Okay,
saying
you're saying
you
that
come in the
prevailing
middle?
wage doesn't have to be paid anymore. So, do
But
we change that?
the bid was submitted and the tax credits were already put out. They're building to the spec they gave the MHDC people.
Okay, but the law,
Now,
the law.
That would
the
be
law-
interesting. I'm sure that, as you and I are both lawyers, we would probably find some enterprising young lawyers to say, well, gee, we can take this to court and argue one way or the
I
other.
think you probably could.
It's possible.
Okay, so, I mean,
My own personal opinion would be, hey, if you're now in a disaster area,
Because the contract-
and
the
the
contract
courts would agree with you, if they would or not, I can't
the
say.
contract would be, you would get the credit from
Alright,
the
yeah.
MHDC, but.
MHDC, the tax credits have been
I
given.
think you could change the rate you're paying your employees.
Well, you got a contract with them.
Maybe you do.
You know, you might. I mean,
You might not. Depends on who's doing the.
you know, I think you have a dim view on how there's.
But you see what I'm saying about how.
You're presenting this image that contractors, oh gee, I have a job now, let's go out and
No, I'm saying
hire
you're
20
changing the
people
law.
off the
You're
street.
changing the law arbitrarily in the middle of a
This is-
project.
Well, if you would like to consider an amendment that says that a change in the middle, I'm sure it could be debated, and I would love to discuss it with you, if you'd like to say, if a disaster is declared in the middle of a project, that you wouldn't want the wage change, or that you would want the wage change, I would like that one better.
It doesn't apply to, it doesn't apply to.
No, it totally can apply to droughts. This is about the need for low-income housing. That's what this bill's dealing with. It's a disaster zone, and if you need low-income housing, if it's a disaster caused by, MHDC grants these things. We had a lot more requests than got approved.
Most of
I
the
don't-
state gets declared disaster zone at some point.
But how much MHDC housing is your county gonna
A
request?
lot. We have a lot in my county.
It doesn't mean they're going to get it, they have to show that they need it. The fact that you're going to ask for MHDC housing doesn't mean that you automatically get it, unfortunately.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Freeman.
Inquire, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Representative, would you give me the numbers again on how much low-income housing was there prior to the tornado and how much you replaced it with, or the town replaced it with?
We lost about 9,000 housing units, approximately 40, or about 4,000 of them would be low income. Again, these weren't low income housing, buildings, these weren't, some of them were apartments that got ran over that were low income housing, but a lot of them was just old housing that you seriously could rent for $250. We had a lot of scenarios where people didn't even have insurance on them. These were old mining houses from
We have
turn of
those
the
in
century days.
all small
And-
communities have.
And when you're making minimum wage, it's hard to, you can't afford $400 or $500 a month rent. You can't do it. And so they were living in these places for $250, and they were older structures. And the tornado could have hardly drawn a better path, maybe one more little hook to take out our low-income housing, the older sections of town with those smaller, older, 100-year-old plus housing, basically.
And so 4,000 units was replaced by 300?
355 is what was awarded, and that is, by the way, not all, the vast majority were not in the disaster zone. Some of these were in Webb City, some of them were in Duquesne, which part of the southern part of Duquesne was hit with the tornado. I got that with our redistricting. I now have the whole zone except for 2 houses, I think.
What happened? Where are those people living? What happened to them? Where'd they go?
They left. A lot of them.
They left.
Neosho, when we had the tornado, housing within a 20, 25-mile area, a lot of small towns, it was filled.
Did many of them
And-
go across the state?
Well,
Across the state
across
line.
state line, you were looking for wherever you could find a place to live. And, people stayed at the jobs that were again, it hit part of our business, it didn't hit our downtown, it didn't hit our mall area, it did hit Range Line, which is a pretty commercial area, but those people that were working restaurant jobs, after a while, you can't find a place to live. Well, gee, if there's a restaurant opening, if you're in Neosho and something opens in Neosho, you're going to take the job in Neosho, so you don't do the 15-mile drive each way.
And you said that from 1990, when the tax credits were implemented, until about 2010,
2010 was when the required, before that, it was not required.
on all low-income housing projects or just low-income housing projects?
Well, the low-income housing tax credits through the MHDC is what we researched, but
But all projects or just the ones in disaster areas?
all,
All of them?
yeah, no, the MHDC didn't require it for anybody.
What about what about the historic tax credits? Are they required to do prevailing wage?
I have not looked at the historics.
And was this change in 2010 done because of some court proceeding, or it was just
It was,
an opinion?
it was done by the commission, which is under the direction of our administration.
Sure. Do you know if it's been challenged in court
Well,
since then?
Not that I'm aware of in court, has been our lieutenant governor, who sits on that committee, brought up and could not, because he's the only person in his party on that committee, got up, tried to get it waived just for disaster zones. And the lieutenant governor has been very supportive. I believe there's someone here from his office today to testify. It was very supportive of this issue and for disaster zones. I mean, we're not talking about the entire huge gamut of our,
Although you could open it up to all, like it was before. Actually, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This bill I have tailored to meet a need that I think is very difficult. If you're going to say, oh, well, these people don't need housing.
Right. So they're making this decision, or they made this decision in 2010 on the guys that they're using tax. They're considering tax credits like some kind of a public entity. Well, don't we do all kinds of TIFs and neighborhood improvement projects and all of that with private companies getting tax incentives but not having to use prevailing wage?
We use tax
That correct?
incentives across the board.
Right.
We, our economic.
So why would they single,
Everything.
why would they single the low-income housing sector out, which in my opinion might be the most important tax credit that we issue, other than the charitable ones?
Again, I think, I am not in the mind of the people
Yeah.
that decided to do this, but I think if you had not had something like the year of disasters, where there was a high demand need for the housing, not in disasters that really don't push the need for housing, it may not have been noticed for a couple more, until you had something like a Malcolm tornado.
So
that-
because of the decision of this commission and the administration, it cost your area jobs, it cost lots of housing, cost people leaving the state because of the decision of some organization and not because of a law change or a lawsuit. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Others? Representative Burns,
Permission to inquire.
go ahead.
Good afternoon, Representative.
Happening.
When you said that was changed, the law wasn't changed, it was just the enforcement of the law?
No, the MHDC Commission, Missouri Housing Development Commission, decided, they implemented requiring prevailing wage. As an attorney, when you, we have other attorneys in the room here, when you read the definition, prevailing wage, when you read the Supreme Court decision on tax credits, this is not a public works project. That's why it had never been put on there, in my own opinion, before. This was done because someone's in charge of the committee, that has the control of the commission, decided they were going to do it. It was not a requirement of law that they do it. It does not, in my argument, it doesn't anywhere, there's nothing in law that says this is required in any way, shape, or form.
Well, you mentioned that you and Representative Weber are both attorneys. I'm not an attorney, but I've been through a lot of these issues, school board, those kind of things. And prevailing wage has been a law in the state for quite a number of years. Is that not true?
That's true.
Okay. And I think it could be argued, I've seen a lot of opinions and observing and reading about the things. I have even the United States Supreme Court, which their judges and lawyers will have different opinions depending on which side of the aisle they come from. So differences of opinion. But when you're talking about income tax credits, you're also talking about government money because it's tax money. It's a reduction in what would be paid in taxes, which actually is.
It is money that does not come in, you're correct, but it is not, the key thing with prevailing wage is government expenditure.
But, I mean, who collects the taxes but government? I mean, seriously, you can see yourself, and I know you must be a very good attorney, and I believe that Representative Weber is, and someone who can delve in and look at those things. I think it could be argued either way. When you're talking about tax money and saying it's not government money, but basically it is, indirectly or directly, it's government, because it's your taxes.
Unfortunately with the law, well, fortunately and unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, we have to deal in specifics. This was not, prevailing wage was not intended for dealing with tax credits.
I want to get to that. The point is, but I think there's ambiguity in a lot of law.
I wouldn't say that's ambiguity.
But it's never black and white. There's always a gray, and that's why lawyers get involved. And you just said yourself before, some lawyers could argue and different things and on different sides. And quite frankly,
that was on a.
But it's still the issue of lawyers. Lawyers, that's where they make their living. A lot of I see these laws come through, and after sitting on Board of Education, you see these things and you think, boy, that's going to give lawyers a lot of time in court. But that's just a point, okay? The issue is, from what I've never worked under prevailing wage, because being, in the Teamsters, you're not under prevailing wage.
You would make more, I would assume, than prevailing wage.
Absolutely, absolutely. But I mean, the point being is, in my understanding, it was always brought about quality workmanship. And in a disaster, it's been notorious, well, just let me finish. In a disaster, it's been notorious throughout all the states that these fly-by-night people come in to take jobs, and who could stand to be hurt the least but low-income housing people? And you say housing in a disaster area, we had two major floods in the St. Louis area in '93 and '95. Part of the area that I now represent has got low-income housing that's being built as we speak. Now they're requiring prevailing wage because it enables a person to maybe buy their first home, and they might be 60 years old, their first home. The thing they can least afford is once they get in that home, they have to go back and make repairs. And that's what prevailing wage, and and just the other part of that, and I'm not trying to be argumentative
No,
with you at all, please don't take it.
No, no, I'm not.
And I do respect you being through law school. I think that's a momentous accomplishment in your life. But just as you wouldn't recommend anybody go to a lawyer who hadn't been through law school, or a doctor who hadn't been through medical school, a neurosurgeon like the one that I went to last year and fixed me, how in the world could we ask someone to come in, a contractor, who doesn't have fully apprenticed trained workers, which are covered under prevailing wage?
Okay.
And that's what I'm talking
Now-
about, quality and workmanship.
Your journeyman, you're mixing a union and prevailing wage here. Those are not the same thing.
But that's who said it. It wasn't set by contractors, it was fought for by, and because in the union, I think a lot of times people, the first thing, when I say union, people cringe, like, oh, those union thugs. That's not what it's about. It's about community, giving things back.
Well,
I mean, but the other point is, law school takes a long time, and so does college, so does an apprenticeship, 5 years. And when you're a journeyman, and it's also an insurance policy, because no matter what local it is, in the St. Louis Building and Construction Trades, Kansas City Construction Trades, if they find that a journeyman messed something up, that union, organized labor force, will send back a journeyman to fix it free of charge. Now, being on a Board of Education, where we went through these people being behind walls doing work that wasn't checked, 4 or 5 years later, you gotta redo it. That's a problem for a school district, or low-income housing, or Joplin Public Schools.
you're talking, again, this is prevailing wage, and I think you're crossing into the union training programs as opposed to private training programs. Let me tell you that with this, I don't know if some of these people may or may not have been union. I don't think they were, but they may have been. But this is, I have documentation. I send out questions. When we upped prevailing, when they went to the federal new revised prevailing wage, our quality of construction went down. Value of windows, because, yeah, it did, not only did the numbers go down, but the materials they put in. Are all Energy Star appliances used? What is the insulation value of these walls? When you increase labor 20%, and you have a fixed amount you're going to be able to deal with on low-income housing, it's not an open-ended market. You have X amount, if you can't make a certain amount of profit, I know some people want to put the evil company in, the private contractor here, or the private company, as the boogaboo bad guy in this thing, but if you personally aren't going to make a certain amount of profit on your wage, given your gas and stuff, you're not going to do the job. Same thing with a business person. To make what they consider to the necessary level of profit, which is why Joplin still, by the way, it is not cost effective to build a lot of low-income housing. I mean, to build something you can rent for $300 a month, I mean, that is tough to do. And it's tough to get any sort of a profit over it. That's why I think I support low-income housing tax credit, because I have seen firsthand the need, and the private market has a difficult time because the profit margin is so low and so tenuous. But these things, when I ask, how are you going to, the contractor that was going to do insulated concrete form, which I'm a big fan of, my second house, we built a house before I started running here. It's insulated concrete form. It can take an F5 hit. Roof may be gone, the walls aren't going anywhere. That changed. 2x6 construction with really good insulation became 2x4 construction with less good insulation. That's quality
I
you're
understand
dealing
that,
with.
but there are also what you call city and county inspectors that are supposed to be inspecting those things. And please, don't get me wrong that I'm making out of business owners a bad guy. I work for
Or our workers.
Well,
Our workers aren't bad.
I work for one of the
They're not
largest
shy.
beer distributorships in the world, okay? And Anheuser-Busch, one of the largest beer companies in the world. So I understand about profit, I understand that you have to make profit. And I understand when you do work, you have to make sure that company makes money, or why would they want you there? That thing. So that's not the point. But we're talking about quality.
Yeah.
I know in St. Louis County, building where I'm from, building these units, they have county inspectors that inspect the quality of the insulation. The windows have to be there. So when a job is bid with prevailing wage, here's what it is. Now, it's unfortunate, and there again, the point is,
Prevailing wages.
my
is
father
labor.
was born in Joplin. My heart went out to Joplin, in any community that would happen to, okay?
I do
And that's
appreciate
not the point of this. But when you start chipping away at people's wages, which this will do, it's been talked about on the floor, lowering wages, that is bad for any community, in my opinion. And I'll leave it at that. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much.
Are there other questions? I have 5 witnesses to testify in opposition to this bill. Gentlemen, with time constraints, I'd like for you to hold it to 5 minutes each, please. Let's start with Mr. Jim Fall.
I do think I have a witness in favor also.
I'll get to that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Mike Lewis. I'm president of the Missouri AFL-CIO, here today to testify against this bill. And all the talk about lawyerism and lawyerly behavior, I brought my lawyer to do the talking. So here you go.
Which is always dangerous. Thank you very much. I'm here testifying on behalf of the Missouri AFL-CIO as well as the building trades in opposition to the bill. Primarily for not only the reasons that were discussed regarding the wages, and I understand the bill sponsor's position regarding that this was originally not prevailing wage required work, and now that now is because of how the commission acted. Primarily on this bill, I would point out that this was a decision of the commission, and the commission changes from time to time. I think rather than the legislature spending time to impede its authority onto another body, that they should respect the wishes of that body, which, as we all know, will change from time to time, and the appropriate remedy if there is a problem, which I personally, in the organizations I represent, don't think that there are. But that should be done through the body that has been granted the authority to handle such issues as it comes before it, rather than here at the legislature. If there are any specific questions, I'm happy to handle it.
Representative Kelly?
To inquire,
Yeah.
just curious, who do you believe created the structure for tax credits?
The tax credits,
Yes.
I assume that was done through the legislative.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that you understood that this was legislation that would affect tax credits, so the legislature was making a decision on those. So I appreciate your testimony, but I think this probably is an appropriate area for the legislature to clarify or classify how we're doing our tax credit programs. So, thank you.
Others?
Briefly.
Representative Weber?
One question. Do you know, are there any federal requirements that, or did MHDC make any, when they made this move, was it to align with federal standards regarding prevailing wage for disaster areas? Do you have any knowledge of that?
My understanding, what I know about the use of prevailing wage in disaster areas primarily revolves around what happened in New Orleans after Katrina. While it wasn't specific to low-income housing, it was certainly affected. After Katrina, the Bush administration rescinded prevailing wage, again, generally, for the entire area, believing that it would be more cost-effective and they'd be able to build faster and cheaper. The Bush administration, after about, I believe it was 2 months, but I'm willing to be corrected on that, reinstituted Davis-Bacon, as the federal is called, because they had a great deal of problems with shoddy workmanship, money not being accounted for. I understand that this is a little different, as the representative, or as the bill sponsor put out, as this was something that has been brought to Missouri rather than something that was already in place. But there's been poor examples of that.
One thing we could look at, I don't know if you know the answer, if anybody else does, but oftentimes they combine federal and state low-income housing tax credits. I was wondering if there's a requirement on the federal side.
That I don't know. I'm happy to get
Prevailing
an
wage.
That I don't know. I'm happy to get an answer. I do know, however, that unlike the Missouri prevailing wage, there is a residential rate for the federal Davis-Bacon, which is used for housing issues. If it's specifically to low income or disaster, I'd be speaking without knowledge.
Thank you.
Representative Smith? Go ahead, sir.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. I'm trying to understand that bill in the sense of, I look at prevailing wage as protecting, giving the person or the people working on the project a fair shot to make a living for what they do. And it always seems like, whether it's a corporation or whoever, when it comes down to cost savings, they start looking at the person that's going to be putting together these projects. And it was mentioned earlier that a contractor probably wouldn't take a job if the profit margin wasn't there or they cut corners. Would that apply to if you're bottoming out the wage? Do you think you're going to get the same high-skilled individual doing that high-skilled job on that project?
I think what the prevailing wage does is make sure that the people that are in that trade, whether union or non-union, but people that are in the trade and have made a living at the trade, are not, their employers are not competing on their wages, if that makes sense. There are plenty of ways to save money, and I applaud the bill sponsors' focus on low income, because I think that is important for working people, as well as for the green portions of it. I think there could be plenty of ways, other than handling somebody's wages, an individual worker's wages, to address cost savings, one of which would be for more infrastructure or more investment in green technologies and building materials, or more use of kind of contractors and materials and those kind of things come in, more investment in low-income housing, rather than capping, or in this case, changing the prevailing wage. Could do things to lower the prices of these green materials.
Okay, so the chance of a contractor going over that prevailing wage is pretty slim, do you think? Do you think the
In Missouri, in the 2 counties affected by job